Thank you. You know, the folks who are in the back, there's no ponchos up here. Like, so it's okay to come on and have a seat. Great. My name is Christopher Penn. I do focus most of my work on generative AI these days, but predictive analytics is a form of classical AI. So let's talk about what this stuff is, why we care about it, and how to use it. You heard the term forecast used an awful lot by President Reader in the previous session, right? And so the question may be, how do you make those forecasts for yourself? That's the question we're going to try and answer today. Why do we care about this stuff? Real simple. At the end of the day, we all make our living, well, tourism in particular makes its living by heads in beds, butts in seats, people showing up and doing things, whether it's skiing or canoeing or whatever. You've got to get people to come out and do the thing. The reason we care about predictive analytics is because we want to know in advance, if possible, what's likely to happen. If we know what's likely to happen, we can then make decisions. But one of the cautions and warnings I will have for you is that analytics without action is just a distraction. If you're doing forecasts and predictions and all these things, and you don't make any decisions with that information, you may as well not bother. So one of the things you have to commit to if you care about using predictive analytics is actually making decisions based on that. This technology is relatively new. Predictive analytics as a discipline has existed for about 70 years, give or take, but the technology and making it accessible to folks who are not like hardcore programmers is relatively new in the last 20 years or so. That said, we have been doing predictive analytics for millennia. Right? We have been trying to predict what's going to happen. What's the next harvest season going to be like? What's the probability of something catastrophic happening? Even in things like stock markets and financials. Back in the old days, you would have a stock market chart, a ruler and a red pen. You'd be drawing lines all over charts just to try and figure out what's likely to happen, trying to forecast. So predictive analytics is not new. You've been doing predictive analytics to some degree, probably your whole life. It's now just how you now have the tools you need to do that. So what is this stuff? Predictive analytics is a form of mathematics. It is a way to calculate what is likely to happen. We're going to talk about one specific branch today called time series forecasting, when you have information that has numbers and time with it. There are other forms. For example, predictive analytics, there is a branch of it, all regression-based, that if you give it a database of, say, potential or existing customers, you could say, okay, who are the customers who are likely to rebuy? That is also a form of predictive analytics. But today, we're going to focus on time series forecasting because time is the one thing that we all understand. It's common to all of our businesses. And if we know when something is likely to happen, we can take action on it before it happens. If you've ever used a service like Google Trends, for example, this is a time series data. So this is people who are searching for flights to Calgary. This is worldwide over the past 5 years. You can see, of course, the pandemic in there. But you can see we have time. We have information over time. And if there are patterns in this that machines can find, we can extrapolate and say what's likely to happen. The wonderful thing about your industry is that you have an enormous amount of time-based data. Right? Your industry, more than almost any other, is time-based. Right? There are seasons to what people do. There are people who visit Edmonton when there's a lot of snow on the ground and it's -9 out. There are people who visit Edmonton when it's 30 out. So you have activities and attractions and things that for every season of the year. That's one of the things that makes tourism so interesting, is because it's so seasonal, it's actually very predictable. In the USA, we have this data sheet from the Transportation Security Agency that just looks at the number of passengers that are going through TSA checkpoints every single day, and it's in millions per day. I don't know if the Government of Canada has a similar data set. You probably do somewhere. This data is incredibly useful for being able to forecast things. I have one travel and tourism client. We use this data to predict things like what promotions to run, because once you know how many people are likely to be traveling by air, you have a good sense of what attractions are going to be impacted. Again, you just heard President Reader talk about the extra 32,000 seats for air travel that Alberta as a whole is looking to accrue. They got to come from somewhere, so if you have that data, you can forecast it forward. You can see that as of 23 and 24, we have basically gotten back in America to pre-pandemic levels for travel and tourism and stuff. It took a while, right? 22 was the first year where it looked okay, as 23 was back to business. So you'd want to look at your own data to see if that holds true. Ideally, if you have data at the province level. So if you have Alberta's passenger data, you could actually do some forecasting on that, say here's where we are and here's where we're likely to go. Now there are limitations to predictive analytics. There are things that it can't do. The first is predictive analytics can't predict things that have never happened. In the USA, for example, right now we're getting ready for yet another presidential election, and even though the cast of characters is theoretically going to be the same, how's immigration in Canada? Is it easy? The audience is very different, right? So you can't predict things that have never happened. We all see this in our data. We see this in 2020 and 2021. A global pandemic, the likes of which we had not seen for a century, happened. There was no way to predict that. I remember I was at an event the first week of March 2020, wearing a mask, and everyone else was like, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? Why are you doing that? And then, of course, a month later, we're all locked in our houses. So you can't predict things that have never happened. If you're trying to predict something that never happened, the machines will simply hallucinate an answer. You also have to be aware that machines predict based on seasonality and cyclicality, right? The rhythms of nature, the rhythms of human beings, and how predictable we are. That means they are inherently going to have a bias towards what has happened in the past, and they're going to try and replicate that pattern in the future. The danger with that is it's kind of like driving almost blindfolded or driving using only the rear view mirrors. If there's a sharp curve in the road, you're in for a surprise. So how do we predict tourism data? What's the process for doing this? We have a framework called the 5P framework: purpose, people, process, platform, and performance. And this framework will help you start building your predictive analytics, I guess, infrastructure, if you will. We're going to talk through each of these steps and what you need. First, the purpose. Why are you doing predictive analytics? The answer to that's pretty simple. We want more heads in beds. When it comes to the people, it used to be you needed very, very skilled technical people to do predictive analytics, right? You need to have expert coders and things. That's not true anymore. With the advent of generative AI and the tools that the capabilities enables, now pretty much anyone can do some pretty advanced predictive analytics without necessarily needing to know how to code or even needing to know like advanced statistical algorithms. If you don't know the difference between ARIMA and exponential moving averages and things, you don't need to worry about that. The machines can handle a lot of that now. What you do need are people who are curious, people who are persistent, people who are comfortable around numbers, and people who are especially comfortable being uncomfortable. This is especially true for stakeholders because when you do forecasting, a reasonable amount of the time the forecast may be bad news. Right? The forecast may not be good. And if you have stakeholders who only want to hear good news, it's a very uncomfortable position to be in to say like, hey, sales are going to be down 22% next month. That's generally not something people want to hear. So part of the people is finding those individuals who are resilient enough to be able to hand bad news to stakeholders, and having stakeholders who are like, okay, I can accept bad news and then I can take action on it, as opposed to, I've had clients literally say to me, I only want to hear good news. I said, well, it's going to be a real short relationship. Let's talk about platforms. As I mentioned, you used to have to know how to code. Today, this is the single best tool for doing predictive analytics, the paid version of ChatGPT. And the reason for that is there's a module inside called Advanced Data Analysis, where you load things like spreadsheets into the software, and then it does all the coding. It's kind of like having a junior data scientist or a junior analyst on your team all the time for only $20 a month. We'll walk through an example of how to use this in just a little bit, but this is the single best tool that I would recommend for people. It's affordable for even the smallest of businesses, and it does the job. That said, your company may have other technologies. Some very popular ones that are well known, Salesforce's Tableau software. If you're a Microsoft shop, you probably have access to Microsoft Power BI. If you're an IBM shop, you probably have access to IBM SPSS or IBM Cognos. Whatever your ecosystem has, there's probably a vendor in that ecosystem that has predictive analytics software. Just know that it is not as easy to use as the generative AI capabilities. All right, let's talk about the process of doing predictive analytics. Let's get down to brass tacks. The first thing you need is data. You need a lot of data. You need to have data that you can forecast, that is numbers over time. So what is that data? Where do you find it? Well, it's going to be all over your enterprise. It's going to be all over your company. If you think about the buyer's journey, at every section over the customer journey, there is data. People who are doing things like searches for flights to Calgary or flights to Edmonton, they're at the awareness stage. They're trying, or even learning, like, where should I go on vacation this year? That's an awareness thing. What kind of data do you have about awareness? People who are in the consideration phase, they're like, okay, I got to plan my vacation. Like right now, this time of year, mid-January to mid-February, people are doing searches for things like vacation packages. They are building their short list of here's the places that it could go. Now, obviously, again, we heard in the previous talk all about intra-provincial travel, but there's also those international travels and people from other provinces traveling as well. How are they building their considerations? What data do you have about how they're building that information? There's surveys, there's traffic to your website, there's social media data, people having conversations about what they're planning. When it comes to evaluation, they're getting ready to make a purchase of some kind. So they've signed up for a newsletter, they've downloaded a kit, they've watched a whole bunch of videos on YouTube. Whatever that data is that you have access to that shows evaluation, that you are in the running. And whether you're running a casino, a hotel, an entire province, you have data somewhere that says, here's what's happening. And we'll show some examples of this in a bit. There's, of course, the purchase. So your CRM, whatever that system is, has purchase data in it, whether it's hotel bookings, whether it's reservations, whether it is tours, guided tour bookings. You have that information somewhere. It's got to be it has to have time associated with it. There's ownership data when it comes to tourism. People who have expressed information about the ownership of their vacation, right? So things like customer satisfaction surveys. When I check out of this hotel tomorrow, Marriott's going to send me a little thing saying on a score of 0 to 10, rate your experience. Things that is numeric data with time that I can use to forecast. There's loyalty information. Again, if you have people who run, for example, a casino, you have customer cards, right? You can see how many people come back year after year or come back for special events and promotions. That information is forecastable. And then there's the evangelism. Once people have gone through the customer journey, how are they promoting you? Right? There's things like review data. There's social media content, video content, people sharing word of mouth about the places they've been and the things they've done. You can see some of that data, collect it, and forecast it. But you'll notice there is no one data source. There's no one system of record or source of truth for tourism and hospitality data. It is all across the map. So one of the biggest challenges you will face is, how do I get my arms around all this data and bring it into a system for forecasting? That's the hardest part, believe it or not. The forecasting is easy. The hard part is getting all of the data and getting it in a timely fashion. When it comes to data, how much do you need depends on how far into the future you want to forecast. And the golden rule is for every one period you want to look ahead, you need 3 periods of back data. If you're forecasting what's going to happen next month, you need 3 months worth of data. If you're forecasting a year ahead, you need 3 years of data. More actually these days. Ideally, it's 5 years for yearly stuff because pandemic. And when it comes to building your forecasts, you want to predict at 2x your decision frequency. So whatever decision you're going to make with your data, whether it is we're going to run an extra marketing campaign, we're going to hire an influencer, we're going to run some ads, however frequently you make those decisions, you want to forecast at twice that frequency. So maybe you have a monthly marketing review. You want to forecast bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, because what you want is you want data that serves the forecast and data that is a midpoint check-in to see if the forecast was accurate and if your decisions have had any impact. This is important because what tends to happen the first go around with predictive analytics is you just get all the data, you're so excited, you say, let's forecast out by the hourly for the next year. You don't make decisions hourly, right? You make decisions at whatever pace. And throughout your company, your forecast will differ based on your decision frequency. So for example, if you run a hotel and you are thinking about using predictive analytics for staffing, we need to judge how many people to schedule for the next week. You're going to want to be forecasting it twice a week so that you can A, see the forecast, and B, allocate staffing appropriately. On the other hand, if you're doing things like government lobbying, well, there's a period of time when you can effectively lobby, and then there's periods of time when legislation gets introduced and approved. That's probably in the 6 to 12 month range. So you don't need forecasts every week for something that you can't effectively lobby for in less than 6 month increments. So you need 2x your decision frequency. That's how to choose your forecasting interval. All right, let's start with awareness data. If you have a website, you probably have Google Search Console. It's free from Google, and this data contains the amount of search traffic that your site is getting for a bunch of different search terms. This data you can download, you can export it. So in this tool, you would export it as a spreadsheet. You would take it over, or you could take generic data. If your website is too narrow, you might want to try a more broad term, like using Google Trends to export, say, flights to Calgary, flights to Edmonton, Canada vacation packages, whatever the thing is. These two sources are great sources of data that are free and that you can forecast from. You would export your CSV spreadsheets, and you would take it over to a system like ChatGPT. You would upload your spreadsheet, and then your prompt. You're an expert in travel, tourism, and travel marketing with a specialization in predictive analytics. You know predictive analytics algorithms like EMA, ARIMA, Profit, Gray Kite, and many other methods for time series forecasting. You handle outliers and deals with seasonality, cyclicality, and other things that can throw off forecasting data. Keeping in mind best practices for forecasting data, I will provide you with a data set of time series data. We want to forecast the year ahead from this data. So this is an example of a prompt. You will modify this prompt to whatever is appropriate for your business, right? So if you're a casino operator, if you're a hotelier, if you are an adventure tours package company, you'll add in relevant details into your prompt along with the thing that you're trying to forecast. When you hit go on this, what will happen is it will start writing code. Like behind the scenes, and you can click on the little thing to expand it, it will start writing the code needed to analyze this data and do that predictive forecast. And it will churn away. You get to watch it code. It's kind of, no, it's not exciting, it's boring. But you're super happy because you're not doing it. And it will start to decompose the data and build your forecast for you. So it will do all the analysis. When I used to do this talk used to be a talk I did about 10 years ago. We had like 40 minutes on how to do each step of this stuff, how to do series decomposition and dealing with stationary data. We don't have to do any of that anymore. The tools do it for us. They write the code. We just tell the outcome we want. And is there a trend? It's important. There's a clear underlying trend in the data, right? This is important. You want it to, as part of your prompting, say, like, is there even a trend to forecast? Because if there isn't, you can't do predictive analytics on it. What you end up with is a very simple chart of here's when over the next however long you're likely to see changes. So let's take a look here. We are here right now, and we have Calgary flights and flights to Calgary. We have right here, we're going to see a bit of a dip as we get into the sort of the late spring, and you're going to see search interest really spike in the summertime. So right around June, July, falls off then towards the wintertime period. You see some spikes around the end of the year. Then you have that big end of year bump, and then you back again. Question, does this reflect what your knowledge is of air travel to Alberta? Is it accurate? Okay, Star Wars is nodding. Everyone else is like, I don't know. That's the forecast. Now, what do you do with this? Well, if you are lobbying, for example, you might say, hey, we're forecasting a really big decline in late spring. So you lobby your ministers and say, we need extra support for some ad campaigns. We need some ad cover to deal with this. If you're a destination, you know that this decline in likely air travel from people searching for these flights is going to impact your business. So you can say, okay, well, maybe we need to change our marketing calendar. Maybe we need to focus on more intra-provincial travel or travel by other modalities because we're forecasting a pretty sharp low there. Likewise, in June and July, when search volume for this stuff is likely to increase, you say, okay, well, what can we do to take advantage of that? What promotions can we run? How can we highlight to the anticipated number of travelers we're going to be getting by air special packages? Maybe if you run like a kayaking tour, you have somebody pick your best guests up at the airport and bring them out to wherever it is that they're going. But that's what you get from this predictive analytics. You get time series data moving forward that you then have to take action on. You have to do something with this information. And again, this is just awareness. So this is the beginning of the customer journey, is people are just figuring out, oh, I'm going to look for flights to Calgary. Your business, if your business is searched for by name, you'll want to extract that data out of Google Search Console and forecast searches for your company's name specifically. You can do the same thing in Google Trends, but you want to know how many people are searching for us by name, and then match that to your business cycle. Right? Look at the last couple of years worth of bookings and say, when people search for our company by name, they search for the JW Marriott Edmonton ICE district. Do we see a commensurate increase in bookings later on down the road from people who are looking for us? The answer is probably yes. One of the things that's nice about these tools, if you do have technical resources at your company, is once it's done writing all that code, you can actually copy and paste it into, in this case, a Python script, and then your technical resource can run that investigation for you over and over and over again every time new data comes out. So you don't have to go through the process of talking to ChatGPT every single time. You can have it write the code with your technical resource and that data, and then have them produce that forecast however often you need it. Right? It's super helpful because it's working software. So it has essentially just written the software for you. All right, we won't go through any more ChatGPT examples because they're basically all identical. It's the data set that you're going to work with each time. For consideration data, one of your best sources of data there is your web analytics, whether you're using Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, etc. When people visit your website, they're there for a reason, right? There's so many other things people could be doing online. They could be watching YouTube videos or TikToks, dancing puppets and people doing strange things. They're on your website for a reason. So getting that data out of how many human beings, how many visitors have made it to your website on a day level basis or whatever from Google Analytics, and then doing forecasting on that. Google Analytics doesn't have forecasting built in, so you have to export the data from it and forecast it forward. But again, seasonality matters. So if you do a couple of years worth of data export out of here, you can forecast the next 6 months and see how many people are likely to visit your website. If you have already done your work mapping out your customer journey, and you know that you need 1,000 visitors to generate 100 inquiries to generate 10 bookings, then if you can forecast out how many visitors you're likely to get, you can forecast essentially the rest of your sales funnel. When we move down to evaluation, what kinds of data do people generate about evaluation? There are specific events on your digital properties that you can use that are essentially evaluation metrics. When someone goes to a shopping cart page and they put something in their cart, well, I was booking my room for here, right? This is essentially, if I'm on this page, I'm at least somewhat serious about making a booking, right? I would not get to this point of choosing a room if I wasn't serious. So you would want to set up events in your web analytics or the system of your choice. When is somebody pretty much about to buy something? Right? They haven't bought yet, but when is that? And can you forecast just that level of demand? At the purchase, of course, you have purchase data, and that's going to come from your CRM. How many bookings did you get? What was the size of the booking? How much money did you get? How much revenue there is? You can forecast revenue, not just into humans, but you can forecast revenue as well and forecast when are we going to have the ebbs and flows of money. This is an example of a travel data set. Just looking at the lead time. So this hotel company wanted to understand how long was it taking people to make bookings. They had that data in their CRM, and they can forecast it forward and say, okay, we know the lead time is slowing down. People are taking longer to make a booking. So what can we do from a marketing perspective to nurture them and say, hey, You forgot to check out, right? You forgot to do the booking, or here's a special, we'll throw in an extra bottle of wine if you book now, and they'll be there when you check into your room. Your CRM has this information somewhere in it. You just have to get at it. When you look at ownership data, again, I just stayed at the Hyatt Place in Wilmington, Delaware, and within like 20 minutes of checking out, this appears in my inbox. It's like, hey, how likely are you to recommend us? This, by the way, is a neat little bit of psychology. They go left to right, so they figure, oh, well, people will be lazy and just hit 10. Data-wise, it's not the best thing to do. But they have this data. They have my response. They have the number. They have the number of people with those responses. So you can forecast things like customer satisfaction, right? That's what this is. If you do anything like NPS scores for task completion and satisfaction, again, you can forecast that looking at your scores. I have one client that does that's in travel that we produce satisfaction scores for each of their business lines, and we tell them, hey, this line here is in trouble. The satisfaction scores are already headed the wrong way, and they're going to go down much further. It's going to have this impact on revenue. You need to do something to fix this department quickly, because if you don't, you're going to lose a lot of money. Loyalty, again, every major hotel chain seems to have a loyalty program, and your business may or may not have a loyalty program. All the casinos near where I live have loyalty programs, little cards and stuff. That data you can forecast from. How many people are redeeming rewards? What pace of it? And what correlation does that have to the rest of our business? Once you know that, you forecast it and say, okay, it looks like our loyalty re-engagements are dropping. Let's make better offers or more frequent offers. If you're familiar with RFM analysis, recency, frequency, and monetary value, you can segment your audience and forecast each segment to say, okay, it looks like we're getting the same number of visitors, but they're spending less. One of the highlights from this morning's talk was the impact of inflation and the drag it's having on consumer spending. You want to be able to keep track of that through things like your loyalty programs to say, okay, we see this economic drag. Let's do something about it. Maybe you offer some specials of some kind. And finally, evangelism. This is things like review sites, Google Business, Yelp reviews, TripAdvisor reviews. All of these websites have enormous amounts of data that's in public, and chances are you or someone you know has a reputation monitoring system that gathers up those reviews and lets you see sort of quick reports on them. You can forecast them, right? If you see over time, hey, our numbers seem to be going down, they're really forecast to go down in 3 months, figure out why. What's in those reviews that is hinting at the problem so that you can avert that. But if you forecast it, you can get ahead of the problem and not be taken by surprise. Here's another example. This is from the social media software Brand24. This is for this hotel. This person said they were not a fan of cornmeal substitutes for real bacon. Okay. I have to say the pedway, by the way, is awesome because I was walking around last night and it's like, okay, this is great that I have to go outside. I made it over to Loblaws. So that's the process for how you do this kind of forecasting. The last P is the performance. Did the forecast do its job? When you produce a forecast, what you want to do is then go back and say, how correct was it? Was it correct? Was it 5% off, 10% off? Was it 30% off? And really importantly, was it reliable, right? A forecast that is 5% wrong, but consistently 5% wrong, you can model that. You can accommodate for that. A forecast that's off 5% one month, 10% the next month, 40% the next month, that's not reliable. And so you can't use that forecast. So one of the things to do is take your forecasts and every time you come up to a decision window, evaluate, did this forecast actually do what was intended to do? Once you figure that out, you can decide whether or not the system you're using, the forecasting system you're using, is effective or not. By the way, when you do that, and if it is not reliable, you give that information back to a system like ChatGPT and say, hey, this forecast had a wide margin error and it really missed. What can you do to fix and improve it? Because ultimately, you want those heads and beds. That is the measure at the end of the day. Okay, so you got your forecast. You're ready to go, right? No. It's like, what? This is something my CEO and partner says to me all the time. I'll hand her a forecast or something, and she'll go, yeah, but so what? Like, I've got this forecast. What am I supposed to do with this? After you predict it, ask generative AI, how to remedy it. After you predict something, ask generative AI how to remedy it. At each stage of the customer journey, you have the opportunity to then ask follow-up questions. For example, let's take consideration, right? Here's the Visit Edmonton page. I took a screenshot of this and I said, if we were pretending to be Visit Edmonton, maybe we're not getting enough form fills, not enough inquiries about this. Why? Why would that be the case? So I took the screenshot and I fed it to a generative AI system, to ChatGPT, and said, you are a UI UX expert. You know website design. You know user interface. You know psychology of color and design. What things on this website would help it convert better for more inquiries? And it came up with things like simplify the navigation, because the navigation bar is like this long. Make the hero image more engaging. Add a call to action, which if you go back, right, you're sitting in the ideal place here. If you just kind of squint your eyes a little bit, there really isn't a what is the one thing that I am supposed to do right now. There's no big, inquire now button as a call to action. Use more visuals, improve the mobile experience. Make sure your website is mobile friendly. Personalize the experience. These are all valid suggestions. So if you did a forecast for consideration and the forecast was going the wrong way, you would then say, okay, generative AI system, I know this is the interface for consideration. I know this is the number we care about, the system. Help me make this better. Help me turn this around. And it will come up with some recommendations. Then you can decide whether or not those recommendations are appropriate. If you go to evangelism, for example, maybe you're this hotel and you're like, hey, there's a bunch of reviews on TripAdvisor, but it's hard to tell why. You take all the reviews out for this hotel, put them in a document and say, you're a customer service expert in the hospitality industry. You know hotels, hotel management, customer service, guest experience, customer care, crisis communications, blah, blah, blah. Your first task is to read the attached list of reviews for the Hotel JW Marriott Edmonton. Your first task is to analyze this open-ended customer feedback and provide 2 bullet point lists, 5 items that are positive, 5 items that are negative, count up all the numbers and provide an overall sentiment and 3 specific recommendations, right? So if I know that I've got a problem with evangelism, if I know that people are just not saying nice things about my business, and there's a lot of that information available, I can say, here's the reviews. Summarize this. This is really important if you are working in a business where you don't have time to read all 800 reviews, right? You just want to know quickly what happened in the last month. Was it spit out? Positive feedback things, exceptional staff service, quality of rooms. The rooms here are really nice. Location, great location, facilities and amenities, good dining experience. Negatives, parking issues. I didn't park, so I don't know if that's a problem or not. Pricing concerns, overly expensive, specific room issues, unusual layouts. Booking and redeeming vacation program issues. That's a problem with Marriott Corporate. Environmental comfort. The lobby is uncomfortably cold in the winter. What did they expect? Bet you that was an American. I'll bet you that was an American. Overall sentiment, predominantly positive, 85%. Recommendations for improvements, enhance the parking experience, make it easier to work with, reevaluate your pricing strategy, improve communication and booking processes. So this is from 111 reviews. And the machine summarized them down. So if I know my forecast is saying your evangelism is in trouble, people are not speaking highly enough about you, I can take the existing data and say, well, how can I fix this? How can I make this better? Generative AI is capable of doing that. So let's look at the last couple of minutes here before we open up for Q&A. Let's look at a very simple case study. This was a casino, a company called Foxwoods, which is a casino about 90 minutes from my house. It's a fantastic place, a lot of fun. They brought us in to forecast floor revenues, so slot machines, blackjack tables, etc. And they had day-level data for the amount of gross revenue they had for each day. So we stuck that into a predictive algorithm. This is in the old days when we had to actually write code. And we found there are these periods here that were below the median. April 30th, this is the week of April 30th, June 11th, 2 weeks in July, and then October through New Year's. Their revenues were forecasted to be below the median and below where they wanted to be. So we handed this to them and said, here's what you need to do. On those weeks, you need to run extra promotions. You've got a loyalty program. Hit that loyalty list. Get people to pay attention. You do all these media sponsorships. Get on some local news, particularly in this sort of long slump here, and say, hey, here's what's coming up. Book better concerts during that period of time. They took that information, then this is just revenue data. They took that information and said, okay, we'll design some marketing programs around this to try and accommodate for what is forecasted to happen. The net result when they made those changes was they increased their revenue 29% year over year. Just by stopping the worst losses, they were able to boost their overall revenue by 29% by taking that forecast and taking clear actions based on it. So, follow the 5P framework. What's the purpose? Who are the people who are going to do it? What platforms are you going to use? Probably generative AI. What's the process where you step through each stage of the customer journey, and then did the forecast do its job? Above all else, remember, if you do a predictive analytics, but you don't take action on it, it's a waste of time. It's just going to consume a lot of bandwidth that you don't have. So make a commitment from your stakeholders. When I give you a forecast, you will do something with it other than put it in a slide. If you have some questions about the AI stuff, we have some resources and things, and now we have time for questions.
Okay,
And a microphone.
And a microphone. So I'll start off at the front here. Who is up first? Okay.
Thank you. So for $20 a month, am I not just giving ChatGPT my data?
So
And sorry, my second question is, what are they doing with it? So how much confidence do I have that my own proprietary data is not being used?
in ChatGPT, if you go into the settings tab, which is in the lower left-hand corner, there's a button that says do not track chat history, and that also does not then use your data for training. The golden rule with all generative AI is the same as social media. If you're not paying, you're the product, right? ChatGPT Teams, which is $30 a month per user at your company, you don't need to change any settings. It does not use your data by default. And anything that uses the OpenAI API also does not use your data by default. The way the data is used by many of these companies is they take it and they look at sort of the call and response that's going on, and then depending on the context of the conversation, they'll say, okay, well, clearly it didn't understand what you're trying to do it because this was the response that it got from you, and they use that to train the model to do better. But that said, you still don't want to be putting proprietary information into a system that does not allow you to turn the privacy controls on. Next question.
Thank you very much for this. I've gotten caught up in the past with 2020 and 2021.
Yes.
How do we adjust for that? And can we just get rid of it? Again, keeping in mind data integrity, and how do we tell that story?
It depends on what it is. So there are some things that are durable. For example, people looking for vacation ideas, right? That is a fairly durable thing, even during the pandemic. There are more specific things that definitely are offset. If you have the data, then what I would do is pair that data, controlling for it as best as possible with pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then today to build sort of an ensemble of the 3 different data sets. You can ask the AI for help with that, but you've got to have that data. And ideally, when you're doing that, it's something where you have enough information that you can run sort of a matching, it will run matching to say, okay, this day and all the factors of data you have about it corresponds most to this day, and that day may or may not be in the pandemic period. If you don't have that, then what we typically advise is you basically don't use anything before 2022, and you shorten the window of your forecasts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, excellent presentation. So my question is that, so in your last case study, we found that from the forecast, we got some actions that you need to do some price and promotions. So my question is how do we take it forward? For example, there are a number of things we can do in price and promotion. How do we choose what to do? Because we can do a number of things, but how would we know from the data that which strategy would be the best to go forward with?
The answer to that question is dependent on how much data you have in your CRM. Ideally, in your CRM, for every human being that's in there, you also have essentially an audit log of all the things that they've done. Visited a website, watched a video, downloaded a paper, redeemed a coupon, whatever that audit trail is. There is a machine learning technique called Markov chain modeling that allows you to say, here's a whole bunch of people, and here's the people who converted, here's the people who didn't convert. What are the things that the people who converted did that the people who didn't convert did not do. And once you have that information, you can then do a frequency count, like, hey, the number of people who converted, they all looked at this YouTube video. Okay, great, let's send that YouTube video to all the people who are not converting and see if that helps. But you need to have that data at the person level in your CRM, and if you don't, that's step one, is get the data. Because this stuff, all of it is predicated on having good data. If you don't have the data, you can't forecast it. Other questions? Comments, dad jokes.
Yeah, dad joke.
Any other questions, folks? Oh, come on.
Oh, hey,
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred CRM
do I have a preferred CRM?
in terms of like the kind of data use for exporting of data? You know.
It depends on the size of your business and how much you're willing to invest. Sort of Salesforce.com is sort of the gold standard, and it is reassuringly expensive to prove that. HubSpot is a very popular one for mid-sized businesses, and it does have a lot of data. The downside of HubSpot is there's like a credit card swipe on like every other menu. It's like, okay, insert additional coins to continue. There are travel and tourism specific CRMs for like hotels and things like that. So it really depends on your company. The thing I would ask any CRM vendor is, what APIs do you have and what data export capabilities do you have? And use that, even when doing vendor selection, say, I need to be able to export my data to make it look like this. Can your software do that out of the box? If it can't, how much will it cost you to program that into your product?
Thank you.
Do you have any specific tips for those of us that are destination management organizations? So there maybe is no purchasing happening. The action might be someone clicking on a link, but they are primarily there for information. So there's no purchase funnel, and a review is not going to be direct to our organization.
What's the purpose? What are you trying to do? What's your function as an organization?
So destination management organization, the function is to share stories about the entire destination. So our function is to bring people to a place and then support our businesses.
Right. So for example, if you are, say, Edmonton, you're going to look at things like heads in beds at all the hotels in the area. If you have access to that data. Yeah. So for those things, one of the things you'll probably want to do is actually build some kind of index. So certainly things like search data, right? If you run Visit Edmonton, you're going to want to look at all the search data about Edmonton itself plus all the major attractions, right? The West Edmonton Mall, how many people search for the largest shopping mall in North America? Things like that. That data over time you can blend together into an index and say, like, here is the Edmonton Travel Index forecast. That then actually becomes a value add for all of your contributors in the area, because you can say, hey, our Visit Edmonton Travel Index is down, we're forecasting it down 2 points next month. So every hotel, you need to get promotions on the board right now, because otherwise you're going to run into these rocky waters. You will always have access to conversation data from social media because it's public. You'll always have access to all the search data because that's public from Google and other search engines. You will want to take a look even just at the activities of the components of your destination, right? So if you have those reviews, for example, you can build with a system like Yext, for example, you can build data inputs and gather reviews from Yext and Yelp and TripAdvisor and stuff, and say, hey, this is our review index for the entirety of the destination, and what's happening, how satisfied people are about the overall experience of coming to a place like Edmonton, right? You land at the airport, here's how people's experiences were. And of course you have federal data from the government of Canada that you should be able to get and blend into that as well. Some of that data will be lower frequency, like some of it's probably annual, but you will still be able to match that to the more frequent data that you have, like search data. I would advise focusing on search data first, because it's easy to get, it's free to get, and it is a strong indicator of intent. You don't search for things to do at the West Edmonton Mall, or what restaurants to eat at the West Edmonton Mall. There's like 800 of them or something. If you don't intend on going there at some point, right? You're probably searching for the latest season of Succession or for Taylor Swift tickets. You're searching for those things because you care about them. So that search data is where I would start.
Who's Taylor Swift?
The commander of the largest standing army of the world by one order of magnitude. We actually looked at some data about that. 500 million people worldwide, and 16% are self-identified as Swifties, which makes it 103 million people. In the United States, it's 55 million people who are avid Swifties. She could literally throw an election if she wanted to.
Swift for president.
That's incredible.
She's eligible now. She's 35.
I found it interesting, the economic impact of Taylor Swift's latest tour, and
Yep.
just looking at that, I think it's been fascinating
Oh, yeah.
for the visitor economy. Folks, we're almost out of time. We do have time for one or two more questions if anyone has any. I'm going to ask one question. Chris, in this space, which companies do you see doing the best work in terms of in the visitor economy? How are people engaging and integrating AI processes, predictive analytics into their business workflows?
In a lot of destination marketing, it's not happening yet. Not at the organizational level. Destination marketing is still focused more on the building blocks of that, of just getting promotions out the door and things. Generative AI, there's a lot of questions about even whether destination marketers should be using it or not because of things like copyright issues, which will be worked out in courts of law. In the EU, we just had the EU AI Act ratified by all 27 member states. So that now governs how all organizations should be using generative AI. That said, one of the things that I would advocate that every destination marketer look at is how do you influence the content that is inside these models? Because for fun, I typed in, what are some fun things to do in Edmonton, and into ChatGPT, and it gave me a list, and I refined it. Said, I'm within walking distance of this hotel. I'm interested in like First Nations culture and stuff, and it gave me a nice long list. I don't know how truthful that list is. Right? I don't know how much is hallucination and how much is not, but I can influence that by how much content I put out in public. One of the best secret tips for doing that, believe it or not, is press releases, because they're so syndicated that you can put out one document about your destination, and the nature of a wire service is it gets replicated 60 or 70 or 80 times around the web. That all gets fed into these language models, and companies that are training AI, generally speaking, you don't need permission to use a press release, right, to incorporate that data. So that will become one of the preferred sources for training models. So once a month, throw out a $99 press release that is about your company, your destination, and the things that you want to emphasize. And I don't have my computer, I would show you. I wrote one specifically for AI. So it's got a prompt built into it so that if someone brings in that URL into, say, Microsoft Bing, it's actually going to influence how the model works for that response. It's kind of a weird little hack. But I would, at the very least, just emphasize, get content out there. Get as much content about your destination out there as possible in as many forms as possible. So if you don't have a podcast, get a podcast, make one, and make sure that the transcripts of it are on the web so that machines can train for it. If you make that audio podcast, stick in an audiogram tool, and now you have a video that you can put up on YouTube that people can listen to or watch, but more importantly, Google's going to take all that data from the closed captions and put it into their models. I have seen in tools like transcription software, without me telling it who I was, it will add my name to transcripts because I have so much content out there that it automatically associates certain word usages with my name. And I didn't tell it, it was me. That's how just being in the information ecosystem can influence language models. The thing is, people are going to use these tools as search engines. They already are. Companies like Bing, Perplexity AI, and even ChatGPT, people ask them questions like, help me come up with some vacation ideas for $1,000 total. To the extent that you can, you want to be in that list of consideration. And the only way to do that is to have content out there about you in all these different ways that people could talk about your destination.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to just wrap up with a couple of critical things that I think I'd like the audience to take away. This was super helpful, and I really appreciated some of the tips and tactics that you all can take home with you. One key piece that I've gathered from this is we know that Canada as a nation is very data poor. Compared to our competitors in the United States, we suffer from a data shortage in especially the hospitality industry. And so in order to be effectively able to utilize these tools, we need to improve the quality of our data sets. And you heard it from even the destination marketing side, in that not all destination marketing organizations have access to business information. That business information and frankly, the revenues are critical to forecasting business levels on a go-forward basis, as well as developing your strategies and altering your strategies, in particular when using generative AI. Would I be remiss in thinking that, Chris?
No, that's absolutely right. Now, the good news is there's a lot of data out there that is public that you can incorporate in lieu of, it'll be further up in the customer journey, but it's still there. People are searching for you. You just need to find that data and work with it.
Folks, this is, for me, it's been exciting. So I did end up writing that opening segment utilizing ChatGPT. So just to give everyone a heads up, I really appreciated that Chris did note when he had used generative AI. I think that's an important piece here for us to all understand. This, for me, is the most exciting revolution since the introduction of the web. And of course, like many of you in this room, I first started on a 14.4 modem. And it was really exciting back then. Yeah. So this is going to be the next generational change. This room should have been packed today. Those folks who are in here are going to be taking away not only relevant ways to implement this into your workflows, but also hopefully to start thinking about how you're going to take this and implement it into your organization. Because as Chris said, not all DMOs, not all organizations are thinking about this, and we have to be. In particular, in order to further our competitive advantage as Albertans versus the rest of the country. So we need to do better than everyone else.
That's a really critical point because a lot of destination marketers are not on the cutting edge. There's a window of opportunity for those who are to take some market share.
Chris, thank you so much for joining
Thank you.
us today. Can I get a big round of applause for Chris?
Thank you very much.